I came home the day I turned 17, soaked in rain and exhaustion, expecting the usual cold silence of our house. What I didn't expect was emptiness. Not the kind where people were out for groceries or a walk. I mean the stripped walls, half-open drawers, and quiet so loud it felt like screaming. On the kitchen counter, where no one ever left anything for me before, was a single sheet of paper, lined and torn from one of my old school notebooks. Scrawled across the middle in my mother's rushed handwriting were 4 words. "You'll figure it out." I stood there for what felt like forever, the damp of my clothes slowly seeping into my skin, the ink on that paper smudged where her hand had brushed against it. There was no explanation, no goodbye, not even a name at the bottom. Just that, like the punchline of a cruel joke. This wasn't a surprise, not really. My family had always been distant. I wasn't beaten or screamed at, nothing people would call abuse. But I was invisible. When I helped, no one noticed. When I asked for help, no one listened. My presence was more of a background noise, something tolerated rather than acknowledged. I remember birthdays with no cake, dinners where no one asked how my day had gone, and nights when I cried quietly so no one would accuse me of making a scene. If I ever said something hurt, I was too sensitive. If I didn't, I was cold. It was a game I could never win. I learned to cook early, cleaned without being asked, and handled my schoolwork alone. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I thought if I tried hard enough, maybe someone would care. They didn't. My efforts blended into the walls, just like I had. But still, I had believed, some tiny, pathetic part of me, that they'd never actually leave. That even if love wasn't in the cards, at least they'd stay. That there was some line they wouldn't cross. Turns out there wasn't. Now, the fridge was humming to no one. The sofa cushions were gone. A few dust outlines remained where picture frames had hung. No more family portraits, no faded photos of forced smiles. Just me. And the note. They left. And somehow, they thought I'd be fine. Like surviving them all these years meant I was ready to survive alone. The first few days after they left, I moved like a ghost through a house that no longer felt mine. I slept in my room, door locked, clutching a baseball bat like it could protect me from the truth. Every hour was a blur of silence and unanswered questions. I waited, convinced they'd come back. Maybe it was a test. Maybe I'd done something. Again. And this was just another punishment. But by the 3rd day, the silence had settled too deep, too final. They were gone. Gone. There wasn't much left behind. A mattress, some pots, and the clothes they hadn't bothered to take or thought weren't worth anything. I found a few crumpled 20s in a drawer they'd overlooked. That and a nearly full jar of peanut butter would become my survival kit. I packed everything I could into a duffel bag. The rest I dragged to a cheap storage unit on the edge of town, paying for the first month in cash. It felt strange locking away the pieces of my life, like I was tucking my past into a steel tomb. But I had no choice. If anyone found out I was alone, they'd call someone. Take me somewhere. I couldn't risk that. I showered at the YMCA. Cold, mildew-scented stalls with broken hooks and flickering lights. I kept my head down, pretended I belonged. No one asked questions, and I didn't offer answers. I cleaned myself in silence, dressed quickly, and left with a face that tried not to betray the fear gnawing my stomach. I rationed peanut butter with plastic spoons stolen from gas stations. I drank water from public fountains. At night, I walked until my legs ached, until I found spots quiet enough to sleep a few hours without being seen. Every morning, I woke up with dirt on my clothes and the kind of hunger that made my vision blur. But I was determined. I wasn't going to disappear. I found a diner that didn't ask too many questions. Just a desperate help-wanted sign taped to the window and a manager who was tired enough not to care who I was. I lied, said I was almost 18 and my parents were overseas. He barely blinked. The pay was awful. The hours worse. Mostly nights. Cleaning up when the drunk crowd cleared. But it was something. The first few weeks were brutal. I walked to work, my shoes falling apart. I smelled like bleach and fryer grease. I burned my hands twice, cried once in the walk-in freezer. and nearly passed out from exhaustion. But I kept showing up. I smiled at customers who didn't tip. I washed dishes until my fingers went numb. I learned how to make coffee the way regulars liked it. And slowly things shifted. One night, after a double shift that had me scrubbing floors past midnight, I pulled a crumpled $10 bill from my apron.
A tip.
The first one. It was small, meaningless to most, but I held it like it was made of gold. I used it to buy more peanut butter and a notebook. From then on, I started writing down every cent. What came in, what went out. I watched YouTube videos on budgeting, cooking, and fixing broken zippers. I learned how to keep food fresh longer, how to stay alert on little sleep, and how to blend in. Most importantly, I learned how to get a replacement ID. It took 3 weeks of calling, lying, and waiting. I used a local library computer, filled out forms, and made fake parental consent by forging a note. It worked. The day that piece of plastic came in the mail, with my name and photo on it, I cried in a bathroom stall until I couldn't breathe. It was my first real win. My first crack of light. With the ID, I opened a basic checking account, cashed my checks, saved up. I moved from sleeping in stairwells to sleeping in the back of the storage unit with a cheap sleeping bag and a battery lantern. It wasn't legal or safe, but it was mine. Every step forward was a war. Against fear. Against fatigue. Against the echo of my family's voice in my head saying I wasn't enough. But I kept going. I was still tired. Still alone. Still eating too much peanut butter. But now, I was surviving by choice, not just because I'd been left behind. And somehow, that made all the difference. It started with a regular at the diner. He came in late, always ordered black coffee and eggs over easy, and read the paper like it was still 1985. He wasn't flashy, never tipped much, but he watched. Not in a creepy way, more like he saw things others didn't bother to notice. One night, after I refilled his coffee without him asking, he looked up and said, "Have you ever thought about doing something different?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I hadn't thought about much beyond surviving the next week. Like what? He slid a card across the counter. Simple white, black font. His name. A small company I'd never heard of. "You've got discipline. Call me if you're interested in temp work. Pays better than this place, I promise." I held onto that card for 3 weeks before calling. It turned out to be basic stuff, data entry, editing documents, organizing files, but it paid twice what I made at the diner. It wasn't glamorous, but it didn't smell like fryer oil, and for the first time, I sat in a room with windows. I said yes to every gig.
Worked weekends.
Stayed up late learning software. Watched tutorials during lunch. Slowly, the jobs got more interesting. I built skills one by one. Spreadsheets, presentations, content strategy, and research. It wasn't long before I was picking up freelance work on my own. By the time I turned 22, I had left the diner behind. I worked full-time for clients who didn't care about my past, only my results. I had a desk, a laptop that didn't freeze every 5 minutes, and an inbox full of projects. I still lived lean, still saved every spare dollar, but the panic was gone. At 25, I leaped and launched my own consulting business.
It was terrifying.
I had no safety net, no one to ask for advice, but I had learned how to move in the dark. I built my brand, built my systems, and built my reputation. Word spread. Work poured in. I hired help, traveled for contracts, created stability with my own 2 hands. By 29, I had hit the million mark. No debt. Health insurance that covered things. A 2-bedroom apartment with sunlight and furniture I chose. Paid off in full. My name is on the title. But even in that comfort, the ache never fully left. I didn't feel hatred when I thought of them. Just something deeper. Heavier. A grief that sat in the chest like wet stone. I wanted them to have tried.
To have seen me.
To have said goodbye. They didn't. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was understanding. And I knew I'd never get it. So I started therapy. It took months just to stop flinching at kindness. To stop talking like I owed someone an apology just for existing. My therapist told me that healing wasn't a destination. It was a process, slow, painful, and sometimes ugly, but necessary. Little by little, I unpacked the past I had shoved into storage units and locked behind hustle. I learned that being strong didn't mean never crying, that surviving wasn't the same as living, and that I deserved more than just figuring it out. I had done that already. Now I was allowed to feel. And for the first time in my life, I did. It started with a podcast. A friend I'd met through a client asked if I'd be willing to talk about my journey, survival, estrangement, building a life from the ashes. I said yes, not thinking it would matter. I figured a few hundred people might listen. Maybe a few would relate. I spoke honestly without drama. Just facts. How I was left behind at 17. How I built a life from nothing. The hardest part wasn't being poor or tired. It was being invisible. The episode went live on a Thursday. By Monday, it had gone viral. Thousands of messages poured in. People who had been abandoned, dismissed, erased. People who had never spoken their truth. Some just wrote, "Thank you." Others poured out stories even darker than mine. I cried reading them. I also felt seen in a way I never had. And then came the emails. The first was from her, my mother. I hadn't seen her name in over a decade, but it showed up in my inbox like it had never left. The subject line was, "Reaching out." That was all. The body was short.
Clean.
Sterile, even. I heard the podcast. "I'm glad you've done well. If you'd like to reconnect, I'm open to a conversation. Hope you're well." No apology. No acknowledgement. Just those flat, neutral words, like I was a former colleague she'd bumped into online. The second came a day later. My brother, Michael. His message was different. Long, hesitant, full of starts and stops. He said he'd been shocked to hear my voice. Said he didn't know everything that had happened, not really. That he was sorry for not seeing more, for not asking questions when I disappeared. He said he had no excuse, only regret. I read his message 3 times. Then I stared at the screen for a long time before I wrote back, just one question. What changed? His reply came the next day. Honestly,
The podcast.
everyone's been talking about it. Your name is everywhere. Mom asked me to listen. Then clients at my firm brought it up.
It was impossible not to.
I realized I never really knew your story. I'm sorry for that. It hit me like a wave. I had imagined, if this ever happened, that it would come with tears, or at least some expression of sorrow that went deeper than embarrassment. But instead, it was my success that brought them back. Not love. Not guilt. Not a sudden reckoning. Just visibility. They hadn't missed me. They missed being a part of what I'd become. For a while I sat with that. Let it turn over and settle. I wasn't angry. Not the way I expected to be. What I felt was quieter, colder. The kind of sadness that comes when you finally get the answer you've been dreading. They hadn't changed. I had. I agreed to meet Michael in a quiet cafe on the west side, far enough from where I lived that it felt neutral. He looked older, more tired than I remembered, but his eyes still held that same mix of wariness and warmth. When he saw me, he stood too quickly, knocking over his water glass. We both laughed awkwardly. It was the first real moment we'd had in over a decade. "I wasn't ready," he said, barely touching his coffee. "Not to see you, not to talk. I've been carrying it around for years, but I didn't even know what it was until I heard you speak." I listened. I didn't say much at first. "I thought they were just sending you to stay with a friend for a while," he admitted. "They didn't tell me you were being left behind. I swear, I didn't know until after. And then when I did, I didn't know how to reach you. Or what to say." I let the silence stretch before asking the question I had never said out loud. "Why me?" He looked away. "Because you were the strong one. You always handled things. Quietly. No drama. They thought you'd land on your feet." I smiled without joy. Strong doesn't mean disposable. I know that now. I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to. He seemed genuinely ashamed, not because I was successful, but because he hadn't stood up for me when it mattered. That counted for something. Still, it didn't erase what was done. Later that week, I sat across from my mother in a hotel lobby. She had aged in ways that went beyond wrinkles. She looked thinner, faded, but her voice carried the same rehearsed calm. "I know you think we abandoned you," she said. "You did." She folded her hands. "We thought social services might step in. Maybe place you with a better family. We weren't equipped. Your father and we were falling apart.
You didn't need that."
I stared at her, stunned by the coldness of it. "You left a 17-year-old a note and walked out. That's not hoping for better. That's erasing your responsibility." She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize either. Just said, "We didn't know what else to do." As if cowardice could ever be a justification. Days later, I got an email from my father. It was short. No greeting. No acknowledgement of the years lost. "Heard you're doing well. Things have been rough here. If you could help out financially, we'd appreciate it." That was all. Not a word about what he had done. No regret. Just a hand held out like I owed them something. I stared at the screen, my chest tight with a different kind of grief. The kind that comes when the people who made you never really see you. Even now, I wrote back only once. "I will not be sending money. I will not continue contact unless, and until each of you takes full responsibility for what happened. Not excuses. No explanations. Accountability. Until then, this conversation is over." It wasn't revenge. It was survival. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done.
It started with small things.
A car was parked across from my building for hours. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize saying, "We just want to talk." Then one afternoon, I came home and found my mother sitting on the front steps of my building, arms folded, eyes scanning every window. I didn't go inside. I walked right past her. She called my name, stood, and tried to follow me. I kept walking. My phone buzzed with messages the entire night. From her. From my father. From numbers I didn't know. I didn't answer any of them. The next week, a letter arrived, no return address. Just a note, scribbled in the familiar tight handwriting I remembered from every school form she signed. "We made mistakes, but you're being cruel. This is your family." I threw it away. Then the knock came. Not at the diner. Not a quiet email. A full knock on my apartment door. I didn't open it, but I heard them. My father's voice, slower, rougher, asking me to reconsider. To be reasonable. I stayed still. Heart pounding. Hands cold. After that, I called my lawyer. I never thought I'd have to legally distance myself from the people who raised me. But I filed for a restraining order. I documented everything, messages, sightings, voicemails. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about peace, about safety, about making the line between us clear, once and for all. When I told Michael what was happening, he asked if we could talk. He brought his wife, Jenny. They looked tired, both of them. I could tell something was sitting heavy between them. Michael kept fidgeting. Jenny held his hand, grounding him. "She deserves the truth," she said to him. He nodded, then looked at me. "There's something we need to tell you. Something I should have told you before." I waited. "They told us you were dangerous," he said. "That you were unstable. That you'd lashed out. It would be better if you were somewhere else." My mouth went dry. Jenny added, "Your mom told me you'd tried to hurt your brother once. That you were manipulative. That you made things up for attention. She said you needed help and refused to get it." I just stared at them. Jenny looked like she might cry. "I believed her," she said. "For years. I thought I was protecting Michael by keeping him distant from you." "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know. I should have asked you directly. I should have questioned them." I didn't speak for a long time. My ears rang with every echo of those old lies. All the times I wondered if I was the problem. All these years I blamed myself. And now here they were, piling onto truth like rubble over a collapsed house. "I was never dangerous," I said quietly. "I know that now," he said. "I didn't forgive them. Not then. Maybe not ever. But I believe they meant what they said. That they regretted playing a part in what happened to me, even if they hadn't held the pen that wrote the lie." The legal action moved forward. Cease. Personal space boundaries. Written notices. My parents tried to push through it. Voicemails, third-party messages. They were desperate now, but never honest. Never willing to sit in the wreckage they made. I stood my ground. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And I chose silence. I chose space. I chose myself. The harassment escalated quickly and cruelly. At first, it was just the same cycle of voicemails, letters, and unexpected appearances. But then a photo arrived in my inbox, of me, walking home from a grocery store. Taken from behind. No message. No context. Just the image. Then came another. This is one of Lily, Michael, and Jenny's daughters playing in their front yard. That's when fear replaced anger. I called Michael immediately. He sounded shaken, but calm. "I was going to call you anyway," he said. Someone broke into our house. They hadn't taken anything, but drawers were pulled open, and a family photo had been torn in half and left on the kitchen counter. That photo used to include me. Then the emails came. They weren't written like before, no pleading, no passive-aggressive guilt trips. These were different. Short, biting lines. "You made this worse than it ever had to be. We can still ruin you. Blood is blood." My hands shook as I forwarded everything to my lawyer. We filed for emergency restraining orders that same day, for me, for Michael, for Jenny, and Lily. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was targeted, menacing, a clear pattern. The judge agreed to hear the case the following week. The courtroom was cold, with flickering fluorescent lights and a carpet that smelled like paper and nerves. I sat with my lawyer, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Michael and Jenny were behind me, silent but steady. When the doors opened and my parents walked in, it was like time folded in on itself. They looked smaller than I remembered, and somehow still managed to fill the room with their presence. My mother's face was carefully composed, but my father's eyes darted, his mouth tight. They scanned the room and stopped when they saw me. The hearing moved fast. Our lawyer presented emails, photos, and timelines. Surveillance footage from Michael's door camera shows a hooded figure lingering too long. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a voice that cut like glass, listened closely. When it was my mother's turn to speak, she stepped forward like it was a stage. "We're not dangerous," she said smoothly. "We just want our family back. Our daughter has made it impossible to even speak with her without being accused of something sinister." The judge didn't blink. "Ma'am, do you deny sending emails with statements such as, 'We can still ruin you'?" My mother hesitated. That wasn't meant literally. It was out of frustration. She's fabricated this idea that we're dangerous. The judge raised an eyebrow. "And how do you explain the photographs and the break-in at your son's residence?" My father stood then, voice booming louder than it needed to be. "This is insane. We're her parents. We're being treated like criminals for trying to connect." The judge turned to him slowly. "Mr. Franklin, you're being treated like individuals who have willfully ignored repeated requests for no contact, who have escalated behavior to a threatening level, and who have made multiple parties feel unsafe. This is not about your role as parents. This is about your actions as people."
They didn't expect that.
I saw it in their faces, the disbelief, the righteous confusion, as though the law couldn't possibly apply to them. My mother turned back to me, her voice cracking now. "You don't understand what this is doing to us." I stood then, not to shout, not to argue, just to speak clearly. "You never cared what anything did to me. Not when you left. Not when you lied.
Not now."
The judge granted a full 3-year protection order. No contact, no visits, no third-party communication. Violations would result in immediate legal consequences. My parents stood frozen for a long moment, stunned into silence, as though they couldn't believe the story had turned against them. But it hadn't. It had simply caught up. As I left the courtroom, I felt the weight of years lift. Not all of it, but enough. It was over. Or, at least, it was no longer mine to carry. The months after the court ruling passed in quiet, cautious rhythms. No more voicemails. No shadowed figures. No emails. Just the kind of silence I'd wished for years ago. Not empty or loaded, but peaceful. Life began to settle into a new kind of normal. On Sundays, I started going to Michael and Jenny's for dinner. Nothing fancy. Just comfort food, laughter, and stories told over second servings. Lily, now 6, insisted on sitting next to me every time. She called me Auntie Emma, with all the weight and joy of a title she'd given me herself. The first time she said it, I nearly cried into my mashed potatoes. I let myself exhale in those moments. Slowly, carefully. I had spent so long expecting the floor to fall out from under me that safety felt unfamiliar. But it held. I filled my apartment with softness, things I'd once thought indulgent. Thick blankets, fresh flowers, candles that smelled like places I'd never been. I kept working, but I no longer drowned myself in it. My therapist called it making space for stillness. I just called it learning how to live. And then one afternoon, the letter arrived. The envelope was plain, hand-addressed in a handwriting I hadn't seen since high school. I stared at it on my desk for a full hour before opening it. My heart wasn't pounding. I wasn't afraid, just uncertain. It was from my mother. 3 pages, written in blue ink. She didn't apologize, not directly. There were phrases. We didn't handle things well. We underestimated your pain. We thought we were doing what was best, but they were wrapped in softness, buffered by explanations. She mentioned therapy, said she'd been going, that she was trying to understand what they had done, not just to me but to themselves. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Not this time. She didn't ask to see me. She ended the letter with, I don't expect you to respond. I just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you, and I'm sorry we didn't know how to love you better. I read it twice. Then I put it away. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. Mostly I felt tired. Because it wasn't closure. It wasn't absolution. It was something in between. A crack in a door I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. But it wasn't anything. I didn't write back. I may never. But I kept the letter. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me of where I'd been. Of what I had come through. It was a strange kind of evidence, not of reconciliation but of growth. Of distance earned. Of boundaries honored. Therapy continued. Some weeks, we talked about Lily's drawings and the way she hugged me goodbye with both arms, like she never wanted to let go. Some weeks, we talked about the letter. About the way healing wasn't a straight line but a jagged path with sharp edges and soft landings. I still had dreams, sometimes, of being 17, standing in the kitchen, rereading the note on the counter. In the dream, I never leave the house. I just keep reading it over and over, trying to make it mean something different. But I always wake up in my bed, in my apartment. With the sun coming in through the curtains, I picked myself out. There are days I feel the ache of what I didn't get. There probably always will be. But it no longer defines me. What defines me now is the business I built from the ground up. The niece who calls me her favorite person. The Sunday dinners. The quiet mornings. The safety I created for myself. I am not what they left behind. I am what I chose to become. And every day, I choose again to stay, to heal, to live. Not for them. For me.